Hi, all. How's it going? This is our last one of these, I believe, as we'll deal with the policy process and the political system today. This is policymaking is where everything we've talked about so far in the semester comes all together, where interest groups and culture and context work through the process of the different branches of government, interact with lobbyists and special interests to produce the world that we know. So, the way that we can start to think of the political system on the grandest scale is what you see here. This diagram is kind of the political system as a whole, and you can start to think of the political system as any other system. It can be a biological system, it can be a mechanical system. So, if you are more inclined towards thinking in engineering terms or science terms as opposed to social mumbo jumbo terms, we're going to start speaking your language because this is where all of that comes together and becomes just like any other system out there. And when I say it's just like any other system, we have inputs, we process those inputs, and we have outputs. So if you're thinking in terms of biology, food goes in, we process it, turn it into energy, work comes out as well as waste. If you're thinking about this in terms of like mechanical systems, fuel goes in, it gets processed, outputs and waste come out. Same thing happens within a political system. So the stuff we were talking about early on when we talked about culture and historical context, that's what you're going to see here described as the environment. This is what the world is, and what the world is shapes what inputs, what demands get made of the system, what it is that people want, what problems are seen, and what people are willing to offer. What are they going to demand action for? What are they going to support? Who are they going to vote for? Who are they going to give money to? How are they going to spend their time? All of that is going to fall on the input side. So, pluralism, groups, individual engagement, all of that's going to happen on the input side of the equation. That is, what is it that people want of their political system? And all those demands get fed in, all of that support gets fed in. And that's going to determine what the political system itself is. So, why do we structure the government the way that we structure it? Based on how much we trust it, based on what our demands are of that government, what it is that we want it to do, who are we going to put into those positions that we've created, who are we going to vote for and offer campaign resources to. And the political system itself is then going to feed off of those demands. What is it that the people have shown an interest in having? And they're going to process all of those resources. And then that political system is going to create a policy. They're going to create a law, they're going to create a new agency, they're going to create a rule, they're going to force us to do something. And that's going to be our output. That output hopefully is good, but a lot of times it's crap. That's the nature of systems. Just like in those biological systems, energy comes out, as does the waste product. Those outputs then change the environment. We have a new law, we implement it. It results in some change. People make money, people lose money, people gain jobs, lose jobs. People like it or they don't. And that process feeds back. It changes the environment. The environment then changes. It feeds back on itself, and that's going to create a new set of inputs. That political system, at this point, we're kind of treating it as a black box. But think of that as our checks and balances. This is the process that goes on between the executive and the legislative and the judicial branch to make things happen. So that's our, view from 20,000 feet of how the political system works. As we start to think about policymaking in particular, how do these mechanisms begin to work within the political system? We have different models, different ways of thinking about this. What you see here is what we call the standard policy model. This is the way most textbooks are going to present policymaking to you. It's nice, it's simple, it's cut and dry. It's step 1 through 6. Sometimes they offer a step 7 or 8. Sometimes they limit it to 4 or 5 steps, but it's all basically the same. If you're science minded, you can think of this as the physics model. It's very cut and dry. Physics is conceptually the simplest science, although the math gets really messy. But Newton's laws, right? You exert force on an object, it's going to get into motion, it's going to stay in motion until opposing forces act upon it. And this is the same thing with policy. This is the idea that policy is constantly a stream, and it's fairly cut and dry. Push on one part is going to cause an effect and a chain reaction down the way. That's pretty easy to figure out. So, step one in the standard policy model is the idea that we make policy by first defining the problem. We need to know what it is that we have a problem with. So, this is the sort of stuff that you all have been doing on the policy project over the past week or so. We're trying to figure out what it is that we actually have a problem with and what problem it is that we're looking to deal with. Once we have an idea of what our problem is and we've defined what that problem is, we need to establish criteria that we can use to evaluate the problem. So, what is the problem exactly? How do we know if it gets better or worse? How do we decide, what it is that we need to tinker with to address that problem? Once we have those evaluation criteria, we can start to then identify different ways of tinkering, different alternative policies that we can start to consider and implement. And it may be that as we start to look at different policies, what we realize is that we've misdefined the problem, or we're dealing with a symptom rather than a problem. And that can happen, and that might send us back to step one or step two. Maybe we've not gotten the right criteria, whatever it may be. But once we start to identify some different policies that are potential, we then start to evaluate those different alternatives. This is acceptable, this is not acceptable, this is likely to work, this is not likely to work. Once we have evaluated the different alternative options that are available to us, we need to identify the one that we want to implement, put it into action, and then monitor it and see and review and decide, did this work or did this not work? Could be that we solved the problem. Congratulations. We can now go and define or find a new problem to work on. It could be that we didn't solve the problem, or we've created new problems and we're back into the, stage one, stage two, trying to figure out again how to tinker with it and fix the solution. So this is conceptually, again, how we would probably hope that a policy process works. Again, this is kind of the physics, step by step by step, cut and dry sort of model. Now, the problem that comes up here is that this is probably not a good description of the real world. It's not uncommon that we don't really know what our problem is, or we never quite reach agreement on what exactly the issue or the problem is that we face. We can certainly disagree on how we know whether we've fixed it or not. We have lots of times when there are people that have solutions in search of problems. Oftentimes we have this thing that we want to have happen, and we have to find a way to make it justifiable. So we're really starting at like number 4, 5, or 6, searching for a problem that we can use our preferred outcome for. It could be that once we can't agree on something, we just end up in this weird feedback loop on step 1, 2, or 3, and never move forward. That's what happens with lots of laws, is we never get our acts together and get them to the point of being evaluated and voted on and implemented. So this is, ideally the way that we would expect policymaking to happen. In the real world, it's oftentimes going to be thought to be quite a bit messier. So that gives us some other alternative views of policymaking. So here's one that has a lot of play within the political science research. This is called the windows of opportunity model. And you can start to think of this as kind of the chemistry model of policymaking. And that's if you're, inclined to thinking in the more scientific terms. In chemistry, you have to have all the different components to get the reaction, right? You have to have chemical 1, you have to have chemical 2, you have to have heat, you have to stir and mix. And only when you have all the different elements does poof, the magic happen, and the new substance get created or the reaction take place. This is the same idea in policy, is that we have an everlasting stream of different problems and different predicaments and different issues that rise and fall. We have lots of different policy ideas that are out there. And then we have the political decision making that's going on. And we need all three, a problem, a potential solution, and the political will to combine at the same time to have that happen. So we may all agree that there is a particular problem, and we may agree that there is a particular solution for it, but we may not ever get around to having the political will to make it happen. So we may agree, for example, that crazy people being able to buy semi-automatic weapons is a problem. And we may have a pretty good solution for how to deal with that in terms of mental health screenings and that sort of thing. We know there's a problem. We have a solution that can certainly deal with that problem. But we may have political disagreements on whether that is going to be an acceptable solution, whether that's a solution that we can get behind, whether it's going to be something that is going to be feasible within the environmental context that we find ourselves in. We may find politicians have solutions. Here's the solution in search of a problem, where we have that political window. We have an idea that we like, we have the political will to do it, but we don't have the problem out there that gets the people on board to say that we need to solve this problem. And if you have the political window, but you don't have the problem to solve, well, then what are you going to do with it? You don't actually have the exigence, if you're going from an English perspective, you don't have the real life situation to apply that political solution. When you get all three working together, that's where you will end up with that policy window. And that is a window of opportunity. It doesn't mean that every time the problem, the policy, and the political will all align, that the magic happens. But it can. At that point, you actually have the little window of time where you can get something done. All the chemicals are aligned, and the heat is being applied, and the reaction has the potential then of happening. So what you get here is a little bit messier of a situation, right? It's not just we have a problem, it's that there's constantly a different stream of problem. It's not that we have to evaluate what is the perfect solution to this one problem, but we have lots of different solutions that are out there. Some of them we have political support for, some of them we don't. Some of them are things that we can implement, some of them are things that we cannot. And it's only when you have all of these work at the same time that you're going to have some sort of policy outcome. So it's not cut and dry in terms of process. It's much more fluid, it's much more messy. The last model that's out there and has some support within the political science literature, you know what, that's the exact same idea. I'll keep this here so you can take a screenshot and look at it, but it's the same concept, just in a slightly different idea here: problem, solutions, politics. And when you have the overlap, is going to be your window of opportunity. Aside from that, as you're trying to get the politics and the problem aligned, that's coalition building. As we're trying to match the solutions with the politics, that's policy. As we're trying to match problems and solutions together, that's going to be our agenda process. You need all of these things going on at the same time to make that policy work. Our third option here, or third model that we'll touch on really quickly, is affectionately known as the garbage can model. So this is best comparison in terms of scientific systems. This is your biology model. We throw all of these different ideas, problems, solutions, decision makers, all of the different issues and participants and everything get thrown into the garbage can. That is our political system. It festers in there a bit. A raccoon maybe jumps in, starts scavenging around in there, happens to, on the way out, knock the garbage can over, and lo and behold, some stuff dumps out. A lot of it's garbage, but occasionally there's a nice little policy gem that might roll out of the can once it's been tipped over. So whatever happens to pop out of the can is considered to be the policy decision that emerges. So really here, there is no rhyme or reason. You can have solutions that don't have problems associated with them. You can have problems that'll never get solved. You could have a set of policy proposals that, for whatever reason, people get behind, even though it's not a solution to any known problem and there's not really a problem that exists. But, voila, we've got ourselves a tax break for some multi-billionaires, whether or not they need it or not. So the garbage can model, we throw everything in. It's a messy system. There's weird leftovers. No one really knows what the tonsils are for. But by golly, you have them until they cause so many problems that we have to cut them out. And the same might be said for policymaking here. Everything just gets stirred up together, and luck of the draw as to what the solutions may ultimately be. So when we talk about these different models of policymaking, I just want to pop us back to, no, don't do that. I just want to pop us back to this original idea here. What you're working on with the policy project is starting to put some of these pieces together with a particular policy area, right? We're starting with kind of the survey of the issue space. And this week you're going to get more into some of the input side. What's the environment look like? What are the different interest groups that are involved that are driving the discussion? What are the different agencies that are affecting that environment? So you're looking a little bit at kind of the input side of the feedback loop, and what are the demands and what are the support going into the political system, and what are the constraints on the political system based on the historical context and the environment. So that kind of should give you an idea of what it is that we're going to be looking at next week as we start looking at what are the different decisions and policies that are feasible to emerge from this. So as you're working through the policy project, know that we're systematically trying to bring the different elements together in terms of putting all of these concepts that we spent the semester with into practical practice. So with that, hopefully this was a shorter one. It felt a little shorter than these have normally been. So I'm hopeful. And with that, I will